Welcome. The League of Women Voters of Washington Education Fund, along with our partners, including the Spokesman Review and local leagues, are pleased to present to you the candidates for our statewide offices. I am Lunell Hott, President of the League of Women Voters of Washington and the League's Education Fund. Ever since the founding of the League 100 years ago, a significant part of our mission has been to provide voter education. This program is an opportunity for the candidates to present their views and positions on the office they are running for so that you, the voter, can make the most informed decision when you mark your ballot. The League and the Spokesman Review are sponsoring debates and forums around the state. We have gathered questions from many locales with the help of our co-sponsors. You can find up-to-date information on our website, lwvwa.org. The League also sponsors an online voters pamphlet with candidate and issue information at vote411.org. We are working with TVW and our other media co-sponsors to extend the reach of these forums throughout the state. Additional viewing information is available at tvw.org. Most importantly, in order to vote, you must be registered to vote. You can do that online with the Secretary of State or at an elections office near you. Our vote411.org website has more information. And now, to get to the candidates, here is our moderator who will briefly explain the process.
Welcome to the debate for the Office of Secretary of State, sponsored by the League of Women Voters and the Spokesman Review. In this debate, the candidates will each be asked the same question and be given 1 minute to respond. And the order of who answers the question first will rotate. The candidates are asked to keep their answers to the question asked, and if they stray, I'll try to coax them back. When a minute is up, they'll be asked to finish their sentence, which I would ask to be a fairly simple declarative sentence, sort of like Ernest Hemingway. If they are embarked on a long, compound, complex sentence like William Faulkner, I'll have to break in and cut them off. Little English lit reference for everybody out there. The Office of Secretary of State is a constitutional office whose duties include being the state's chief elections officer. It also is the office for the registration of corporations and nonprofits, the keeper of the state archives, coordinates the state's address confidentiality program, and manages the state library. It has a salary of $134,640 and an annual budget of about $25 million. With us today are the two candidates on the November 4th ballot for the office, having survived the state's top two primary. Kim Wyman, a Republican who is in her second term in the office and a former county auditor, and Gael Tarleton, a Democrat who is a four-term member of the State House of Representatives and a former Seattle Port Commissioner. Welcome to you both. By the rules, the first question goes to the person who is first on the ballot, and that's Ms. Wyman. So, Ms. Wyman, tell us why you believe you are the best candidate for this position.
Well, thank you, Jim. The reason I believe I'm the best candidate for the Secretary of State's office is really my experience and leadership and integrity that I've shown in the years I've served in this office and as Thurston County Auditor. I'm a certified nationally and locally certified election administrator and have 27 years experience overseeing over 120 elections. And I've done this in a nonpartisan way and really ensured that voters in Washington State have the most accessible and secure voting system in the country. And I think in this COVID-19 environment, we're really seeing the impact of that system that we've built because the states across the country are looking to Washington to see how they can adapt their systems to be more like Washington. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done here, and I want to continue doing that in the next 4 years because I think our citizens in our state deserves an accessible and transparent voting process. So thank you, and I look forward to the debate.
Thank you. Ms. Tarleton, the same question to you. Tell us why you believe you are the best candidate for this position.
Thanks so much for having me. I am still the current state representative for the 36th district, and I am proud to serve the people of my district and the people of Washington State. And I'm running for this job because the job has changed, and I knew it had changed in 2016 in October when we were informed by the intelligence community officials and the Department of Homeland Security Secretary that every state in the country was under attack by the Russians to interfere in our 2016 elections. And I knew from that moment on that I was going to spend every chance I had to strengthen our voting rights, to strengthen our voting systems, to strengthen our elections, to deal with the potential risk that we would be under either foreign or domestic attacks in 2020. And here we are. Voting rights are under attack. Our elections are under attack. And extraordinarily for me, with someone with 30 years of national security experience defending our country against foreign or domestic threats, we are under attack by both a foreign party, Russia, which has just been confirmed again by the Senate Intelligence Committee, as well as by our own president. I am running for this office to make sure that we have an opportunity to protect our elections.
Okay, stop. Thank you. Next question goes to Ms. Tarleton first, and I would ask you to give us 2 specific ways you would improve the election system in Washington over the next 4 years.
There are 2 areas we must make progress on. Number 1, voter engagement and participation, which includes addressing the really terrible evidence that more than 1 million eligible age voters in this state are not even registered to vote. We must find out the barriers and we must eliminate those barriers. Every person who is eligible to vote should be registering to vote. Every person who is registered to vote will have a voice in our democracy if they are able to participate in our vote. We need to understand why that barrier exists and why that gap in participation exists. The second example is I want to have innovations in our technology to make our elections more accessible to those with disabilities. Make sure our elections officials at every county are offered the opportunity for continuing education to deal with the nature of the threats we face in the future. And I will work really hard to make sure that that is available to everybody.
Thank you. Ms. Wyman, 2 specific ways you want to improve the election system in Washington in the next 4 years.
Well, Jim, I really think it's continuing the work that we've already started. And the 2 areas I would focus on is going to be continuing to build out our cybersecurity defenses and system and make sure that it continues to be fully funded by the legislature. The second area would be to fine tune and learn from this election cycle how the new laws like same-day registration, automatic voter registration, and 16 and 17-year-old pre-registration worked in the actual general election, and what areas we need to fine tune. And I say this because these are 2 areas that we've spent in the case of cybersecurity the last 4 years, really fine tuning and building out our defenses, making our system much more secure, training our election officials, doing tabletop exercises, and working with federal and state partners to make sure our system is secure. I want to continue that in the future, and the same is said for those new laws. This will be the first time that we are probably going to experience lines in 10 years, and I want to make sure that we do well going forward.
All right, thank you. Ms. Wyman first. The percentage of ballot rejection varies greatly from county to county. What changes are you proposing to improve or at least make more consistent ballot rejection rates?
Well, we work very closely with our 39 county election officials, the county auditors, and the election director in King County to make sure that we're standardizing processes across the state, and the way a ballot handled in King County is handled the same way in Nessauton or Spokane or Clark County. And so we're going to continue to work with them. And right now, we're actually working with the performance audit section of the state auditor's office, who's drilling down and looking at ballot rejection rates to see if there's some sort of pattern. Maybe it's maybe there's some ethnic or racial lines that are causing rejection rates to be higher for some groups than others, or maybe the procedural things like people don't know that they need to get a postmark before election day or on election day to have their ballot counted. And we're really going to use that data to try to improve those rejection rates and get them even lower than they are, because let's face it, even one ballot that's legitimate and should be eligible to be counted being rejected is unacceptable.
All right, Ms. Tarleton, rejection rates varying from one county to the next. What changes do you think are necessary to improve the rejection rates in Washington State?
I've been in the state legislature for 7.5 years, and during that period, the legislature has put a high priority on getting the Secretary of State's office to address different kinds of risks, including the risks associated with ballot rejection rates, signature scanning equipment, whether or not the ballot counts have been monitored properly to give people confidence that our elections are being conducted effectively and efficiently. And the Secretary of State's office has never come in to the legislature and said, please help us do these risk limiting audits. Please help us do the ballot rejection rate audits. That legislative agenda for ballot rejection rates being monitored was funded by the legislature, by myself, as well as the chair of the Tech and Economic Development Committee, where I have served for 7.5 years, to make sure that the state auditor was identifying where are the areas where we need to identify potential risks to people's having their vote counted.
Okay. Ms. Tarleton, next question first to you. And I think this is up your alley. Election security, critical component for a democracy. As the top elections official in our state, what action would you take as the most important step over the next 4 years to fortify our elections against malicious interference, foreign or domestic?
My Election Security Breaches Act, which passed this past year after 3 years of trying without any kind of support or testimony in support from the Secretary of State, addresses 3 elements of security. Number 1, making sure our election systems, equipment, voter data files are being tested for potential vulnerabilities as well as for performance, to make sure that we are doing everything we can to resist any kind of potential interference. The second element of that legislation is to identify a foreign entity so that our Attorney General can actually file a lawsuit if in fact we are notified that a foreign entity has attempted to intrude in our elections and penetrate our networks. And then the third element is that all of that equipment must be tested at a state or federal laboratory. That is the way we protect against not only current kinds of risks, but identify future risks that we need to ensure we are protecting our votes against.
Ms. Wyman, malicious interference and election security. What, over the next 4 years as the top elections official in our state, what do you think is the most important step to take to fortify our elections?
Well, the bill that Representative Tarleton is talking about, we did actually support, and it was actually codifying things that we had already been doing for years. So what we would continue to do is work in the area of cybersecurity, working with our state and federal partners to train our employees to make sure that they understand how to protect themselves against threats, phishing scams or spear phishing scams, or using multi-factor authentication, the things they need to do to protect their local election office and our state office. From there, we also have done tabletop exercises, trying to anticipate where the attacks might come from and what we're going to do to respond and recover from them in case they do happen. And then finally, using our Election Security Operations Center that I believe is the first one in the country that is not only protecting the Secretary of State's office, but is protecting the 39 county election offices as well. This is a really powerful tool, and I want to make sure we continue to build that out and provide it as a resource statewide.
Ms. Wyman, question for you that from something that came in the mail today. Washington is a vote by mail state, and it relies heavily on the integrity of the United States Postal Service. Today, a postcard arrived in the mail telling me to request my mail-in ballot at least 15 days before Election Day. Is the U.S. Postal Service a reliable partner? And if not, what do you propose to do about it?
Yes, the USPS is a reliable partner for election officials here in Washington State. We have a nearly 30-year relationship with them, and we meet with them on a regular basis. In fact, during an election, we meet daily with them just to make sure that things are working well. That's in conjunction with our county election officials. The postcard that hit households this week was something that we didn't know anything about. It came from the national USPS offices. We're disappointed because it really should have been coordinated with the 9 states that are going to be conducting vote-by-mail elections. They could have gone to states like Washington, Colorado, or Oregon, who've done vote-by-mail elections for many years, and we could have provided them better language to use that would be less confusing for our voters. And that's why we've done an outreach campaign starting yesterday to let our voters know that they don't need to request an absentee ballot to vote in this election. And we're just trying to deal with the misinformation that was shared with our voters across the state.
Ms. Tarleton, given this postcard that came in the mail today telling me to request my mail-in ballot, would you describe the U.S. Postal Service as a reliable partner? And if not, what do you propose to do about it?
President Trump has been attacking the U.S. Postal Service since early April. Our Secretary of State has not stood up to those attacks. And I have said for months that when you do not stand up to the attacks against our voting by mail and our postal service, we are only going to be subjected to more attacks. And that is exactly what has happened. A 30-year relationship with the Postal Service does not matter when Trump is in charge and he is intent on undermining the integrity of this election. That's why we have to address the nature of the threat. The threat is Trump. It is the attack coming from the federal officials. It is the Director of National Intelligence being directed to not brief Congress on foreign threats to our elections. It is the head of the Postal Service dismantling mail sorting machines, mail processing centers being closed in the state. We need a state response. Our secretary has not given us a plan for ballot boxes, election certification, independent of the threat from the federal level.
Sort of a follow-up on mail-in voting. Ms. Tarleton, should the postmark deadlines in the future be changed to accommodate potential delays by the Postal Service?
Our most important responsibility right now is to address the damage done to our post office and to our confidence that our mail-in ballots will be postmarked on time, in the county auditor's office on time, to be counted on time. Our postmark system is a very important part of the mail-in ballot process, and we don't control it. The idea of the risk is that we don't control the Postal Service operations. We don't control their operational capability. What's in our control is the laws that we pass, the ability we give to our auditors. And so I believe that in the future, we have to have a very strong, robust commitment to ballot drop boxes, to much better voter education, to making sure that things like this postcard coming from the National Post Office, it is an intentional attempt to disrupt and confuse our voters. We can no longer rely, as Trump is in power, we can't rely on something that's not in our control.
Ms. Wyman, should the postmark deadlines be changed to accommodate potential delays by the Postal Service, which seem to be a possibility in the future?
Well, the beauty of Washington's system is that we have a postmark, and county election officials in this general election will have 20 days to be able to receive that ballot as long as it has a postmark on or before Election Day. And I think that our state has multiple layers of security and access built in, and this is the beauty of Washington's system. So that's the first layer. The second layer is our ballot drop boxes. So right now, as we sit here today, 90% of Washingtonians live within 3 miles of a ballot drop box or a voting center. 70% of Washingtonians live within 1 mile of one of those things. So we have a real robust opportunity for voters to be able to return their ballot that does not involve the USPS to return the ballot. And I'm very confident that the ways our way our law is structured, that our voters are going to have their ballots counted as long as they get that ballot postmark. So I've always been a supporter of the postmark return. Oregon, as you know, is it's in the door, and that's just not going to serve our voters as well.
Okay. All right, we now come to my favorite part of the debates, where each candidate gets to ask the other a question. Under the rules, the asking candidate gets 30 seconds to pose her question. The other candidate gets a minute to respond, and the questioner gets a minute to respond to the response. Ms. Wyman, you get to ask the question first. What question would you like to pose to Ms. Tarleton?
Representative Tarleton, kind of along the lines of comparing our records, how will you gain the public's trust that you'll be a fair and transparent arbiter of our state's elections as Secretary of State, when as a legislator you voted for and supported Senate Bill 6617, which shielded legislators' email and calendar records from public disclosure?
There you go.
I have a 16-year track record of public service and holding public office in this state. I was a UW strategic advisor. I was a Port of Seattle commissioner during the Great Recession. I have 7.5 years as a state legislator, supporting all of the most important programs to protect our people, with strong bipartisan support for my election securities legislation, for my election funding legislation, for affordable housing, for protecting our seniors and disabled veterans from being priced out of their homes, with passing the most important modernization of our senior property tax exemption as House Finance Chair in 2019. And every once in a while we stand on our record. In this legislature, I did take a vote, and then I apologized to my constituents, and I said to them, I will honor the Public Records Act voluntarily, and I have every moment since that day.
Ms. Wyman, you have a 1-minute response.
Oh, I didn't know I got to give a response. Yeah, I just, this is just another example of the contrast between my opponent and myself. And I've spent my career both at the county level and the state level as an elected official in the executive branch who has always been under the public disclosure laws. I have always had to submit my calendar or email or any other public request to any requester, and we've always operated this way. And that's probably, I think, the biggest contrast. One of the contrasts in this race is that approach. And, does the public have a right to see our work or not? And I think that in the area of elections, this is critical. We want to have a transparent process. And I find it interesting that that my opponent and the Democratic Party have done public records requests on my calendar and my email going back for my tenure as Secretary of State as opposition research, but I can't do the same for her legislative record.
Ms. Tarleton, your turn to ask a question of Ms. Wyman. You're muted.
The Secretary of State and every citizen and every resident of this state can do a public records request on my legislative record. I also served as a local Port of Seattle commissioner, where I was under the Public Records Act for my full 5 years of service there, as well as my 8.5 years at the University of Washington. So I do fully understand the responsibility of every elected official to comply. My question is, you've called on the office to be nonpartisan, but you have chaired a Republican Secretaries of State office. How do you reconcile the decision to have this office nonpartisan?
Oh, I reconcile it with the 20-some year, almost 20 years that I've served in elective office as a Republican. I've always been overseeing the elections at the county level and the state level, and I try to make sure that I do not publicly disclose where I stand on social issues, because it can be on the ballot as an initiative or referendum. I don't support presidential candidates for the same reason, because I oversee that election, and then actually this year I'm not even endorsing any candidates for for similar reasons. I do try to keep my real political engagement and activities to a minimum here in Washington State, to be mindful of that role as the chief election officer. But I have played in national elections. I have worked on a committee that does help Republicans running for office as Secretary of State to help them raise money and to help with their campaigns. So yes, I have done that.
Ms. Tarleton, you have a minute for a response to the response to your question.
I've been in the legislature for the same period of time that our secretary has been Secretary of State, and it just was peculiar to me. I have been House Majority Floor Leader. I helped push forward a lot of legislation for same-day voter registration, pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds, making sure we had free postage, and making sure that all of the work that we did on election security and elections funding was fully bipartisan. And I think it's really important to distinguish between what bipartisan work in consensus building can accomplish for all of the people of Washington State, and making the office nonpartisan is the responsibility of the people. If she wanted it to be nonpartisan, she's been there for 7.5 years. She could have introduced the legislation. We would have had a policy debate. We would have been able to hear from the people. We would have been able to hear public testimony, the pros and the cons. I am really proud of the work I have done as a legislator, as a Democrat, and as a port commissioner, as a nonpartisan official.
All right, now back to the questions that were suggested by the League of Women Voters. I think this next one goes to Ms. Wyman first. Should the state require counties to mail out voters' pamphlets for the primary? And if so, who should pay for it?
Well, now one of the things that I believe actually Representative Tarleton was part of is the state is now required to reimburse counties for the state share of election costs. So that has really equalized the funding for counties, at least in terms of not having to shoulder that burden alone. So there is some capacity for states in terms of financial support to do a local voters pamphlet. And certainly our public wants to have it. When I was at Thurston County, we always did a local voters pamphlet because our voters wanted it and needed it. With that said, it is a challenge, and we really saw those challenges bubbling to the surface because of the timeline between candidate filing week and when that pamphlet needs to be printed. You have to not only proof the pamphlet for all of the correct information, you have to translate it into multiple languages. In some counties, and many counties are going to choose to do this. So it's a timeline issue, probably more than funding, but certainly I want to work with the counties and the legislature to explore it and try to make it happen.
Okay. Ms. Tarleton, should counties have to mail out voter pamphlets for the primary? And if so, should they pay for it, or should the state pay for it, or both?
There is now a law that starting in 2021, all of the counties must publish a primary voter pamphlet statement and do it printed, not just online. That was legislation because we heard many stories from many voters. Part of the problem for all of them is they have no educational information about any of the candidates if they don't have a voter pamphlet statement coming to their house. And that is a key area where we need more voter engagement, more voter participation in what needs to be in the voter pamphlet statement. The second component, my elections funding bill, we had it as a top priority this past session, and it got passed with strong bipartisan support to make sure that the state was reimbursing the counties for state-related expenses, including our elections in the even-numbered years. This will free up important resources to conduct more voter education material, more voter pamphlet statement production costs, and it was long overdue. It should have happened a long time ago.
Next question, first to Ms. Tarleton. Many voter-proposed initiatives have significant corporate funding, much of it from out of state, and they use paid signature gatherers. Now, some people will say that this isn't what the original supporters of initiatives intended. Is this an issue, and what changes, if any, do you support for the initiative process?
It's clearly an issue. There have been major violations of state law, paid signature gatherers not being registered as independent contractors, the companies that are paying them not registering to do business in Washington state. It has been the subject of numerous lawsuits filed by both the Attorney General and the PDC, looking at different issues related to appropriate influence. This is corporate influence in our elections, and it is happening right under our noses. It has not been investigated adequately. We need more corporate finance laws about who can pay for, how to disclose dark money in the ballot measure process. A lot of legislation has been passed by my colleague and my colleagues and I on ensuring that we are at least naming the names of the donors to ballot measures getting on the ballot. There are a lot of reforms we need to examine, and I will invite a work group to make sure that we are identifying how to do that.
Ms. Wyman, the initiative process. Is this what the original supporters of initiatives intended with corporate funding, paid signature gatherers, out-of-state money? And if it's an issue, what changes would you support for the process?
Well, I'm a big supporter of the initiative and referendum process, and it's over 100 years old, and the originally was from an initiative, ironically. And, the original idea was to give people access to direct democracy. And I want to continue that. Our framers were very careful to make sure there weren't any barriers to that process, because they think that the common citizen can make as good a law as any legislator. The courts have been very careful to also say you don't want to put any barriers in front of it. And that's why it's very difficult to tweak it. In terms of its overall effectiveness and the effect of corporate money or out-of-state money or paid signature gatherers, if you look over the last 20, 30 years when these things actually started bubbling to the surface, you still have a pretty similar thread. A lot of initiatives get filed, few qualify for the ballot, fewer actually are passed into law. And I think that is very much in line with what the original framers had in mind when they envisioned this process and started this experiment over 100 years ago.
Just for clarity's sake, Ms. Wyman, are you not suggesting any changes to the initiative process?
I certainly want to have discussions. This is going to come up, I'm imagining, in the next month or so, because we're having questions about getting electronic signature gathering, making that effort as something to as a way to deal with COVID-19. I think, again, we have to be really thoughtful in this process. We do have a crisis going on right now, but as you look out to the future, if this is something that makes it easier to gather signatures, is that going to have a long-term effect and set a precedence that would open up our ballot to having 20 or 30 initiatives on the ballot because it lowered the bar and standard for how to qualify for a ballot. Our signature gathering process has a threshold, an 8% threshold of the votes cast for governor to qualify for an initiative to the people for the ballot. So we want to make sure we're mindful of that and we look at the whole complexity of it. But I certainly would love to have that public discussion to think about the long-term impacts. And if we want to tweak it, we need to be thoughtful in it.
Ms. Tarleton, electronic signature gathering for initiatives, would you support something like that?
Not right now. We do not have the technology to ensure the integrity of electronic processing of the signatures. Signature scanning technology is a very serious issue, even right now with vote law. We need to address the fact that people's signature may in fact be changing not just over a year, but over months, because very few people are now regularly signing checks. And then the other element here is the confirmation that the person has a residence and an opportunity to be part of the electoral process here in Washington state. Electronic signatures are very much vulnerable to potential manipulation. We need more funding for these kinds of technologies. It would have been nice to have the cybersecurity funding to address technologies associated with our elections that were in H.R. 1 in Congress in 2019, which our Secretary of State testified in opposition to. And we would have really helped having that technology and that investigation right now.
One last initiative question, first to Ms. Tarleton. Should the Secretary of State have more authority or less authority to reject ballot initiatives? There's essentially not much authority right now, but.
Right. The ballot initiative process is very appropriately evaluated with both the Attorney General's office for legal, constitutional, and enforceable elements. And I think it is essential that the Attorney General stay in the lead in order to not only determine the ballot titles, but to ensure that the integrity of the ballot measure is, in fact, able to be either defended or contested when it goes to the people. The people need to know that if they are passing a ballot measure that is going to have statewide impacts on their quality of life and on their rights and their opportunities to have a really decent life in our state, that it is in fact consistent with the rule of law. And so I want it to stay with the AG.
Ms. Wyman, you've had some initiatives that people have asked you not to put on, not to certify, not to put on the ballot. Should you have more authority or less authority, or do you have the right amount of authority for that?
I think it's the right amount of authority, and I would kind of tweak a little bit of the response of my opponent on this one, because the AG, while they do write the ballot title and they do a review of a few of the legal aspects of the technicality of getting the initiative or referendum onto a ballot, they don't get to make the determination of whether or not it's constitutional. And in fact, this is something that has been challenged multiple times, particularly by signature guru Tim Wyman, that the constitutionality of a ballot measure by initiative, and the courts have been very consistent over and over and over to say that that's a post-election challenge. And in fact, when you look at the gun rights initiative, or excuse me, the gun initiative a few years ago, 1639, that was where it really came to a head, because I did believe that some of the elements of the petition didn't meet constitutional or state law, and I didn't have the authority to reject it. So I think the system works pretty well right now.
Ms. Wyman, how many voters have been removed from the voter rolls in Washington in the last 4 years? And what do you see as the legitimate and illegitimate reasons from removing voters from those rolls?
Mm-hmm. Jim, I did not prepare the exact number question of how many voters have been removed from the rolls. What I can tell you is we do ongoing list maintenance here in Washington State, and that's in compliance with not only our state laws, but the National Voter Registration Act, which is an act from 1993 that really defined what you can and can't do related to taking or removing voters from the rolls. And particularly, it took away this practice we used to do called purging, where if you didn't participate in a presidential election, we just took you off the rolls. We don't do that any longer. In fact, we don't purge anyone. The way that a voter is removed is if we get an address change from the post office, it says that their address is undeliverable. It starts a process where they move to inactive status for up to 2 years with 2 federal elections, which could be as few as 2 years, as many as 4 years. And we take this seriously. We also are part of a consortium that does data matching against 30 other states to make sure that we're keeping our records up to date and not erroneously purging anyone from their rolls.
Ms. Tarleton, do you have any concerns about the way that voters are removed from the rolls? Or is it too strenuous? Is it too loose?
I am concerned. During the tenure of this Secretary of State, our research showed that more than 1 million voters had been removed from voter registration files. Whether you call that purging or whether you call it removal, it's still that they have lost their right to vote. In that more than 1 million, about 750,000 were dumped into a category of other. The Secretary of State explained that it may have been an element of the transition from old systems, legacy systems, to vote law. We should have had a huge red flag when 750,000 names drop off a defined reason for why they are removed from the voter registration files and are dumped into a category of other. So we need to investigate that. The other thing I want to change is we need to change this idea that you lose your registration right to vote if you don't answer a postcard that says you're being removed from the polls after not voting in 2 presidential elections. That is wrong.
Continuing on that theme, what would you do to improve transparency for the public on the way voters are removed from the rolls?
Who's that addressed to, Jim? I'm sorry.
To you.
The way we increase transparency is to stop depending on the antiquated method of sending a postcard in the mails. A lot of people change addresses and they might not get that postcard. We need to find technologies in notification by text. I passed legislation this past year with a funding to the courts, for example, to notify individuals that they were up for a court appearance to address a warrant issue, to get a text instead of letter mailed in the mail that they might never get because their address had changed. We need to change that law. We need to change the law that says you just have to figure out that we have a online voter registration system, or that we only have 2 ways, maybe at the library, maybe at the DMV, where you can register to vote. We need so much more education to the many newcomers in this state on how to get registered to vote.
Ms. Wyman, transparency on the way that voters are removed from the rolls. Your opponent seems to have some concerns about what they're told. What would you do to improve transparency?
Well, that's what we've been doing, and it's quite frankly the power of vote law. So going back to the other issue, the reason that we have a number of people that have been removed from the rolls is these legacy systems. And all of these laws were put into place, some of them over 30 years ago, that require us to notify by mail. So even if we do use technology, which we do, that's a requirement of federal law. And make no mistake, we are constantly cleaning up our rolls. 10% of the population moves every single year. And what we want to do is keep up with those moves. So we do a lot of proactive activity here in Washington State. We're part of the ERIC consortium of states that are comparing data. And when we find out that, Gael Tarleton moves from Seattle to Denver, we can notify her and Denver can do the same thing. And we can just find out where she considers her address. So we do a lot of proactivity. And that's why you've seen 1 million records. They're not all removed. And if they are removed, it's in large part because a voter asked for it. So our records are updated in a way that is very voter supportive.
All right, Ms. Wyman, should state residents be required to prove U.S. citizenship and legal residency before getting a driver's license? Since this could impact voter registration, would you support this?
Going back to the 1993 National Voter Registration Act, when President Clinton signed that into law, one of the things that it did is it decoupled using your ID card as a proof of citizenship. And when that happened, that really changed the way that we did voter registration. You don't have to go to a voter registrar and prove that you're a citizen any longer. We haven't in almost 30 years. And I say that because it makes sense. And it has really streamlined our voter registration and access to our voter registration. So we can have online registration. We can have mail-in forms. We can do voter registration where it meets their needs and where they can do it most conveniently. I know there are many people that would like to have a citizenship check, but this would be a whole nother topic of discussion. And right now, I think our system works very well. As more and more people get enhanced driver's licenses, just naturally, more of our voters on the rolls will have proven citizenship, and we will be able to have verified all 4 elements of voter registration.
Ms. Tarleton, should state residents be required to prove U.S. citizenship when getting a driver's license and thus getting automatic voter registration requests? Or do you support the system as it is right now?
I am very proud that we do not require any resident to prove citizenship to get a driver's license, an identification card, to have access to a job. We in this state have fought really hard against the Real ID Act, the federal act that was under the Department of Homeland Security that would have demanded our state, along with every other state, put citizenship status on our driver's license. And I worked with my colleagues in the legislature through 2016 or 2017, and I can't remember the date that we finally passed the law that said we will have a Real ID compliant driver's license that has no reference whatsoever to citizenship status, we are not going to make our residents find a job, figure out how to raise their family, and only because they can prove that they're a citizen. We need a voter registration and voter access system that makes it clear you have the right to live in this state, and then we will figure out if you have the right to vote.
Switching topics a little bit, I know we've spent a lot of time on elections and voting, but the Secretary of State does other things. One of the things, Ms. Tarleton, the Secretary of State is in charge of state archives, some of which are available digitally, but not all of them. What would you do in the next 4 years to increase the number of documents online?
We already started this effort this past session when the federal government announced the closure of the facility at Sandpoint. I worked with my colleague, Representative Lakonoff, and we got a budget line item into the budget to ensure that we could work with the state archives, the state museums, the state library system, the Secretary of State's office, and many University of Washington, Wazoo, Western Washington, all the college and university library systems and the county systems to start the process of setting up a network where, as we got digitization going for all of our archives, the archival materials could be shared among all of those statutorily allowed library systems. And I think that this is one of the most important ways we need to innovate and address the opportunities for technologies to help us help people know our state's history and our state's commitment to the future.
Ms. Wyman, over the next 4 years, what would you do to increase the number of documents online?
Well, a couple of things. One of the things I'm really proud of that we've done in my office is we created a program where anyone, quite frankly, in the world who wants to be a temporary archivist can help us do the data entry and indexing of our records. And that's why we have over 200 million of our archival records that are already up and available on our digital archives. And I want to continue that work. We partner with the college campuses around, the university campuses around the state, where we have regional archives facilities, and we're engaging students that are studying archives and our history as part of that effort, and just continuing that with our new archives library building that we hope to break ground on this fall, and have that up and running, and really have that data resource center and an opportunity for people to help us get those archives digitized. The hardest thing to do, as anyone knows, scanning is easy. It's doing the actual data entry, and I think that our program works really well.
Okay. Ms. Wyman, what changes, if any, would you propose for restoring the rights of felons to vote?
Well, you know, this has been an evolutionary question in our state since the Rossi Gregoire election, where it really became front and center. And we moved to a bright line that if a person is under the supervision of the Department of Corrections, they were ineligible. If they weren't, they were. We've done a lot of things over the last, I guess, 16 years to get into to people who are separating from being incarcerated, getting them information on how to vote, how to register to vote, how to be participants. In fact, one of the programs we're doing with our state libraries, getting them a library card at their local library, like the Spokane Library, which, by the way, was our pilot project there, but also getting them information about how to be a registered voter, because quite frankly, the best way for someone to be engaged in their community is being a civically engaged citizen who participates and votes. And so I think it's just a constant education effort, and we do it through our libraries that are in each of the correctional institutions across the state that my office oversees, and then we do it at the time that they are leaving their service or their time in their incarceration.
Ms. Tarleton, what does the state need to do, if anything, more to restore the voting rights for felons?
I am strongly in support of not only restoring voting rights for felons who are in community facilities once they are released. I also have made a decision that I will support voting rights for those who are incarcerated. You know, you don't lose all of your other constitutional rights to due process, to a jury of your peers, to the right to a speedy trial. You don't lose all of your other constitutional rights when you are incarcerated, you should not lose your constitutional right to the right to vote. We have made huge strides in bringing educational opportunities into those who are incarcerated to reduce the rates of recidivism, to increase the likelihood that those who are incarcerated can be released and have an opportunity to earn a living immediately. We have removed so many costs associated with being incarcerated so that people don't come out in poverty and already in debt. This is one big step forward for voter participation, and we need to do it.
Okay. Ms. Tarleton, ranked choice voting is an electoral system in which voters rank candidates by preference on their ballots. Do you think ranked choice voting should be implemented in Washington state?
I do, and a lot of people don't know that we already have tried it in a couple of counties, in Pierce County and Yakima. I supported co-sponsored legislation this past session to make sure we had public testimony and starting the public debate about how to best adopt at the local level, give local jurisdictions the ability to introduce ranked choice voting in their local elections. A lot has happened in the technologies since we first tried this in the 2006-2007 period through 2009. And we need to explore whether ranked choice voting actually will have the impact of bringing more voters into our democracy. There has been a debate about whether more people will turn out and vote if they can do ranked choice voting. I have been talking to the advocates about examining the experiences in California and some of the other states that have adopted ranked choice voting so we can get back at it and try it again here in Washington.
Ms. Wyman, should ranked choice voting be enacted or used in Washington state?
Well, once again, this is an election administrator point of view. You really have to work through the details because I think we're going to see a lot of local jurisdictions wanting to use this to be able to deal with inequities that they may have in voting in their jurisdictions, like what we saw in Yakima, the city of Yakima, and the litigation that came from that. With that said, ranked choice voting is one of those issues where it's great to throw it around, but right now we don't have any certified systems in Washington state that can actually perform a ranked choice voting election. So off the top, we need to deal with that. The second level is explaining it to people. And I know that sounds really foundational, but I would say that 16 years later, we still can't convince and explain to people the outcome of the Rossi Gregoire election, at least to half of the state. And that's a pretty straightforward election that they know. Now explain to people that in the first round of voting, Gael Tarleton was in front. The second round, she was winning. In the third round, Kim Wyman won because we dropped off a couple candidates. And so it's really, how do you explain it to people so that they have confidence in the system?
We have come to the point where each candidate gets to make a closing statement to the audience. The first closing statement will come from Ms. Wyman.
Well, this election, you have a real choice before you. This is a contrast election in every metric imaginable. And what I am advancing and why I want you to vote for me is because I have spent the last nearly 20 or 27 years running nonpartisan elections. I have the support of state election directors and county auditors, as well as secretaries of state, current and former, who are Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And they support me because they trust me because of that job experience and the way that I perform the job. We need a Secretary of State who is going to be impartial and fair and is going to inspire confidence in our elections. And that's what I do. And I want to make sure that that I can use my experience and this impartiality to continue to have elections that people in Washington believe are accessible and fair, because I've been part of I've been not only a builder, but an architect of the current system that we have that is a national model, and I want to continue to move that forward into the future. Thank you.
Ms. Tarleton, your closing statement. You're muted. There we go.
The job of this office has changed, and what we had in the past, what may have been working in the past, is just not going to take care of what the future holds. We are in the most unprecedented time in our modern history in this country, where we have foreign attacks, domestic attacks from a Russia president and from a US President Trump. We need to stand up to those attacks. We need to address the risks to our voting, in the integrity of our voting systems. And we need to think forward about the fact that our elections are always going to be at risk of those who want to undermine the integrity of our democracy, undermine the confidence that we have in being able to elect duly, fairly elected representatives. You know, when you stand up to those who attack our democracy, you are protecting our country. You aren't protecting a party. You are protecting every vote. You aren't protecting an individual. We are responsible for our democracy, and it's time we step up and take responsibility for it. I really appreciate the opportunity to do that for you.
And that's going to do it for the Washington Secretary of State debate, sponsored by the League of Women Voters and the Spokesman Review. We thank you for watching and urge Washington voters to watch for the ballot, which will be coming in the mail in the middle of next month. And for those of you who aren't yet registered, remember, you can do it online, you can do it by mail, or you can do it in person at your county elections office. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you for informing yourself about the candidates. The League is proud to be nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government, always working on vital issues of concern to members and the public. Our main goal is to make democracy work. The State League sponsors the statewide candidate forums and debates, and our 20 local leagues, made up of 2,400 members, produce local election forums. This is the centennial year for both the League and the 19th Amendment, which recognized women's right to vote. It took more years for all women and men to actually secure the vote. Although our name contains the word women, the League is open to all men and women 16 and older, and our purpose is to make sure voters understand issues and candidates. The League has two organizations: the education arm that presents candidate forums and debates across the state. It is our impartiality and our history as a trusted organization that gives us this privilege. The education arm, through the League's Vote 411 website, provides candidate information. It is different from the guide you receive from the Secretary of State's office because it is the only resource that covers every race in Washington. The League doesn't tell you how to vote, but it ensures you have enough information to be confident about your vote. The other is the advocacy arm that promotes public policy in Olympia through about a dozen volunteer lobbyists. We are grateful to our partner, the Spokesman Review, and our local co-sponsors who have joined us in soliciting questions from voters for these programs. You can get a copy of your vote at LWV.org. It has detailed information about elections, descriptions of elected official offices, what to listen for in a debate or forum, and elections that have been won or lost over a single vote. You can also access Vote 411 on LWV.org.